So I think we'll do a few questions, and then I think they might
Yeah.
bring up a couple of chairs, and a couple of the people who worked on this
okay. All right.
can join us.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
do we have?
Yep. We say the word chairs, and there they are.
Yeah.
I would imagine that the undertaking of this movie must have been a very, very big, complicated thing for you. Can you hear me? Sorry. I'm just saying I would imagine that that undertaking this film must have been a very big, complicated thing for Jacob.
Yeah, it was, but
Mic closer to
I think that first, when there's a, when there's a secret, the way that her illness was, I think I clearly had some desire to talk about it with her friends. I mean, when I began to call people as she was shutting down, I found it strangely beautiful and moving. You know, I wrote about this in the Times Magazine that, and one of the things that we do over at the Times often is we write pieces about people's deaths in the style section now, and we do these kind of, I had done a piece about a therapist who had committed suicide and sort of the effect that this had on his practice, and the thing that I decided that we were going to do, that me and sort of with my editor Stuart Emmerich, was that we would reconstruct to the best of our ability the last days of his life, because I think that when deaths catch people off guard, there's just this immense desire to know what actually happened, and yet you read these obituaries about people's lives that are wonderfully written and tell you all kinds of things about sort of what happened to them for the first 78 years of their life, and then they don't tell you what happened in the last 2. And so I thought that obviously when she died, it just seemed obvious that I would write about it in some way, and that I would try to deal with it. And meanwhile, there had been all of these kind of great cultural documentaries, the Bill Cunningham movie and the Deanna Vreeland movie and the Joan Rivers movie. And at some point I got sent to do a movie on the woman who was doing, a piece on the woman who was doing the Deanna Vreeland movie. And I said, what are you doing next? And she said, well, I'm doing this thing on Peggy Guggenheim, but there's sort of one other that I'm interested in. And I said, well, what's that? And she said, Nora Ephron. And I just said at that moment, well, actually, I think there's someone ahead of you. And so then Alessandra Stanley at the New York Times sent me over to Graydon Carter, and because he had done a number of really great cultural documentaries, one of which was The Kid Stays in the Picture, and also Surfwise, which doesn't get mentioned as frequently and is, you know, really kind of a masterpiece. And he just said, we're going to HBO, and from there it just kind of went on, and then Bob Eisenhart, who was really the other person on this, had done the Valentino movie, which I had also loved, and the thing that was so remarkable to me about that movie was that they were such comic characters, but he found with Matt Tiernauer this soft love story between these two eccentric and plastic surgeried guys, and it wound up being not a, it just wound up being so much richer than what it might have been, and so then we just sort of started from there.
And at what point did you focus on the everything is copy question?
Well,
as a structural
I
device?
think we knew, I knew from the beginning that would be part of it. Graydon actually had asked me to write up a pitch for HBO, and that was the title then. So it was the title from the very beginning. And then as we began to interview people, you know, every time we were sort of getting into a different period of her life, the question with the work was, how is this thing relating to what's going on privately, and how is she changing and shifting and shape shifting, as you know, as someone says in the film.
Well, was there anything during the filmmaking process that surprised you, that you found?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing was how much she changed over the last years of her life, because if you live with someone, whether they're your spouse or your parent, it's sort of like the way that you don't notice when the person you're involved with gets fat. And I think that if your mother gets softer, you live with her all the time. I mean, even as an adult, you know, I mean, I saw her every week pretty much. And so it didn't really occur to me until I began to talk to all of these people, and they said, well, I was getting these emails from her and these phone calls, and I certainly knew that she mentored people, but I didn't know the extent of it. But you know, I didn't find, you know, I think there are all sorts of people who, you know, Sarah Polley, who did The Stories We Tell, another wonderful cultural documentary. I mean, she went and basically discovered that her mother was a completely different person than whom she knew. And that didn't happen here. I mean, my mother was what you see is what you get. So if you're looking in this for the son to sort of find a big secret, I don't think it's there.
Yeah, sure. I love the Julie Nixon moment.
Yes, that is a great moment, and it was a great piece. I mean, she was really fearless and really bitchy in a kind of delectable way, and it was a time where, as a journalist, she was just able to do things that you kind of can't do now. You know, she left Esquire for New York Magazine, and she goes to work for Clay Felker there. This isn't in the movie, and she and Clay Felker really didn't like each other, and she left New York Magazine and wrote this entire parody piece of Clay Felker and Gail Sheehy, who is a writer that Clay was in a relationship with, and wrote this sort of parody of their relationship. And she gets back to Esquire and winds up in a feud with the ownership, and writes this piece for the New York Review of Books about sort of what a bunch of dimwits they are. You know, I mean, whereas now if you tried to do that, you'd be unhirable. You would be Monique or Alec Baldwin. I mean, that's sort of, you know, I mean, there's sort of no other, but back then it was like she just sort of put it down and she kept going, and because she was as gifted as she was at this kind of essay writing, there was sort of always a place for her to go do it. Should we have? I think we should have a couple of the people who really worked on this with me. Bob Eisenhart, Sheila Nevins. She hates this, but let Sheila get.
She doesn't want to. Yeah.
And Nick Hooker, come on down too. So.
The chairs are here, and
let's get around for them. Bob did all of the editing with me, and Nick was our sort of visuals guy who, you know, all of those lovely shots that you see, all of those sort of lovely shots that you see of people in the center of the frame like that, that there's a kind of Jürgen Teller by way of, well, I'm not sure who you would say but it's softer than Jürgen, but it's definitely a certain kind of photography that I think is very effective now. And so
well, how did you arrive at the form of this movie? I mean, you know, every movie has its own process, its own ecology.
Well, after it went to HBO, we went into production in the summer of 2013. Bob Gottlieb and Liz Smith were the first two interviews, and that was very helpful because I think that I needed to start with the divorce in some way, because I knew that I was going to have to deal with that. Mike Nichols had gone to breakfast with him, and he warned me. He said, that's the center of your movie, and if you're not prepared to do that, don't take this on. And Bob Gottlieb was her book editor, and he just knew everything about her, and so we started with them, and it took a while to get people. Mike Nichols actually took about a year to get the interview. He was sick at first, and I think he was worried about how he was going to look on screen. And Delia took some time to get, because I think she was going through her own process and figuring out how she was going to write about it, which she did. And so we just sort of went about it that way. And then about 9 months in, Bob came into the office and sort of started to play with things. And he would say to me, well, we don't have as much on this. Can you get this in your next interview? And we just kept interviewing people and looking at old archive and reading the old stuff, and it flowed pretty naturally.
Maybe we have time to take a couple questions from the audience if anyone wants to pitch in. No? Yes.
Your brother is curiously missing.
Why is Jacob's brother missing from the film?
I believe he may be in the back somewhere at this point.
Not missing from the audience, just from the film.
But my brother is not a writer in the, he's not a journalist. He writes music, and he had a very private relationship with my mother, and in some way because, I do a similar thing to her in some ways. I think that he wanted to keep what he had with her private, and I think that that's a perfectly fine choice. Everybody is not going to write about their family, and everyone is not public about it. And I think Nick obviously had feelings about being on screen talking about her at this point, and so many people did. I mean, Kate Capshaw, who's here and is lovely in the film, I mean, said to me at one point, that she felt a little bit like it was, that coming to do the interview was like getting her teeth pulled, that everybody was feeling that they were going to have to go to the dentist. And I understand that. I think that's completely true. I mean, you don't, when your friend dies, you don't think, oh God, let's go do an interview about this, So that made it difficult.
Yes.
There was no final word from your father. I wonder, how did he know? Did he come to see her at the end? Did they find any kind of closure ultimately?
Did everybody get that? No final word from Jacob's father, and did he come to visit at the end, and did they get any
Did he
closure?
visit at the end? Is that what you were asking? No, he didn't. They had a kind of understanding at the end, and I think that they had mostly made peace with each other over what had transpired between them. I wouldn't say that they were friends. I think they were very good at being co-parents, but no, it was really, the people in the hospital are almost, the people that you see in the film. Amy doesn't talk about being in the hospital in the movie, her sister, but she was there. But there's almost no one else. Binky Urban, who was her book agent, and Binky didn't want to do it. It was too raw for her. So there were quite a number of people actually who said no, and more power to them.
A couple more? Yes.
I actually really enjoy the mantra that you guys have, every copy, but I wanted to know, what does it more mean to you? What your moms do, what you think your moms do.
Right. Well,
I'm going to just repeat the question. This is the question about everything is copy in the mantra, and what does it mean to Jacob?
Yeah, I think this was probably what you were getting at earlier in terms of what we were after from the beginning, and what we really found, or what I really felt was that that this was a movie about how comedy exists at the sort of intersection of bravery and ruthlessness, and and that I just kind of wanted to dance in the middle of that and in the ambivalence of that in some way. And for a while, I sort of figured that I would kind of come to a decision. Is it right to write about your family or not? And then in the end, what I kind of felt is the question is more interesting than the answer, because it's, I think it's both the most liberating thing you can do in a certain way, and I think it's also the most dangerous thing that you can do with, or not the most dangerous thing, but certainly it's fraught, and it requires a certain kind of, get out of my way, and that's the fun of it. I don't know, how did you?
Well, it seemed like even before I came on the picture, there was the name "Everything Is Copy," and so we knew what the beginning was, and we knew what the end was, and I think it was kind of how did you get to the end? So it's kind of this mystery story about how to resolve that issue, and I think there was a couple interviews that really did that. The Tom Hanks around Lucky Guy helped us get there. And then we used a couple different techniques. Jacob would write some stuff, but then at one point we interviewed you. We got everybody.
We did do that.
Everybody got in the room and interviewed, and that's where the line about everything is not copy came from. So
Right.
somewhere 3/4 of the way through, we finally kind of got to a resolution on that.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting process.
We're getting the high sun and we have to wrap it up, Jacob. But I
Perfect.
really want to thank you for bringing your film to the New York Film
Well,
Festival.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks for coming.